Our door. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on. Let's move on with the last presentation of our stage. And I'm really proud to announce our speaker. He is an educator, he's a mentor, he's an entrepreneur, and he's a really requested speaker worldwide, Professor Shailendra Vyakarnam. Professor, hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. The sun is shining. I can't ask for more.
It's shining in London, in UK, right?
Yes, I live in Cambridge, and it's shining here, so I'm in very happy form.
So welcome to Riga. It's a sunny day here too. And Professor, the floor is yours. Yeah, I'll be here watching your presentation, and if you have any questions to the audience, I'm happy to help, and I'll be the one checking the answers, okay?
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank
You
you.
just announced your poll just a moment ago. I hope you can hear me okay.
Absolutely.
And I was just very curious about picking up on the question of the concern about IP, and maybe we will come back to that during the conversation. So that should be okay.
Sure.
And I have two points within the presentation which I would like the audience to maybe have a conversation back with me. And I see that there are about 6 people, so I think we could probably run this in a more intimate style than in a conference presentation style, depending on how it goes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to making a start. So should we get going?
Yes, Professor, absolutely. We can start.
Okay, so when I had this briefing, I'm delighted to be with those of you that are attending. I look forward to it. The idea about how science and business can collaborate, right? And I think, yes, there are regulations, there are issues of infrastructure, there are issues of ecosystems and so forth. But at the end, in my opinion, from what I have seen over many, many years now, it finally comes down to people and how people get on with each other and what the issues are for them. So I'm going to try and cover some of those topics with you just now. Through the following, so I was set the challenge of how do you mix oil and water? Either the scientists here amongst you and or the entrepreneurs amongst you would be seen as the oil, or somebody would be seen as the water. And I know that typically they don't mix, right? But if you can get them to mix, maybe there's something really fascinating that can happen. I think the question about mixing oil and water is also partly to do with the evolution of the science into business, and actually of the scientific team into a business team. This is like asking typically the scientist to do a 180-degree turn from facing this way towards their scientific requirements all the way across to the other side to say, I want to talk to businesses. It's a very different set of languages and constructs involved. And it's not surprising, therefore, that there are some real challenges that go on in that field. In the meantime, of course, it comes to the leader. Who is the leader of this particular little project that is converting the scientific discoveries into the business? And is the leader somebody who can nudge little by little, like herding sheep or herding cats even, into something that looks like it's going to take shape? Or do they try to, really force fit everything and move forward? We all live in what we think of as democracies, and therefore I'm sure that we have to figure out how to nudge and shape and bring people together to be able to convert the scientific disciplines into some kind of a business agenda. So this is a topic very close to my heart because I set up the Center for Entrepreneurial Learning at Cambridge University in 2001, 2003. That period took about 2 years to get going. And I can remember actually going to the chemistry department at the university to tell them what I was trying to do. And the response I got from the 3 big professors who were sitting there was, yes, of course, if our students can't make it in academia, they can try business. So I have been insulted in many ways by many people, but that was one of the most beautiful ones. right? So the idea here is that we don't want to be doing this thing. So there are cultural things that still get in the way of our aspiration to make science available to solve the big problems of the world. So could it be like mixing oil and water? If we do, by the way, and how do we do this thing? Do we discover the subtle molecules, the little, atoms, the droplets of water, the droplets of oil? Do we need to fragment, defragment? And if we do achieve all of that, what could we get? What is the hidden depths that we have to go to discover that magic which can happen? I give you that with a simple metaphor of a painting. This is one of my cousins in India. And I did not, because I live in the UK, she lives in India. We had not seen each other for a long time, and I discovered only recently that she has been a painter for many years, and she paints in water, she paints with oil, etc., etc. And then she sent me very kindly a picture of one of her recent pieces of work, and I thought, it kind of captures the essence of India in the 1960s, right? Of the small rural village, and it's beautiful in its own way. But I had no idea this existed inside of her, right? Of course, we know about painters. So this conversation of what is inside, what is the inner enterprise, or what is that piece of diamond, that is that jewel which is inside the individual that needs to come out, which means that we're really trying to build businesses or build solutions out of a sort of a sense of kindness rather than a sense of competition. Which brings me back in a little while to the question of IP ownership and equity ownership, and how that can become such a zone of conflict if we don't take the idea of how we try to mix things together rather than trying to compete for those limited resources that we might have. So at this point, may I ask if anybody has any particular question through the moderator? Maybe you yourself have a question for me that I can address. Can I just stop for 2 seconds to have your thoughts here about the questions that might come in my direction?
Yet, Professor, I'm checking now if there are some questions at the moment, and there are not. But if I may interrupt you for a second, you mentioned that there are only 6 of us. It's not correct, because there are 6 persons in the Zoom. But those who are watching you now in the platform of the Deep Atelier conference, that might be measured in hundreds, I guess. But I don't know the exact number. But it's definitely more than just 6 or 7.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that reassurance. So tell me, from the polls that you conducted in the last few days, why was the poll regarding IP ownership thought to be an important poll to conduct?
Why was it so important?
I'm throwing you under the bus now.
Yeah. Let me think a minute.
Yes.
It's like we take it for granted, I guess. And if you ask me to explain why exactly is that important, it's a property just the same way as any other property, including finances, right? And in many times, your finances are really depending on your intellectual property, and that might be stolen from you. That's why I think it is important.
Yes. Okay. So you make 2 points which are really critical here. One of them is the ownership and the theft of it. And the other side of it is the commercialization side. And often the debate, I believe, arises between who owns the IP and what we can do with it is one question. And whether somebody would steal the idea and run away with it, or the IP and run away with it and do something different, is a separate and interesting question. I'd like to try and address this because it's very, very important to overcome some of the misconceptions and mythologies that are contained in that anxiety. So if you could encourage the audience, by the way, if they have any questions or they agree or disagree with me on something, let me throw out a sentence here to provoke some retaliation. Which is that I think the question about IP is the wrong thing to worry about. The thing to worry about is the customer. and whether the customers are interested in buying anything from us. So IP is an irrelevance, but customers are relevant. Discuss. Okay, so maybe some questions will stimulate from that, or some provocation will stimulate from that.
Yeah, I would like to remind the audience that commenting or asking questions is technically really, really easy. Just below the main window in the platform, the window where you are watching the live stream, there is a place where you can write your comments. And if you want that comment to appear as a question via the moderator, there's a little box. Just don't forget to check it, okay? So you're highly welcome, dear listeners.
Very nice, thank you. So going back to my time at Cambridge for 14 years, of all the time that I ever spent there, nothing ever really failed because of the concerns over IP. Things only ever failed because they had no customers. That's my experience of that period of time. But all the conversations always started about the IP ownership, never about customer acquisition. So let's move on to my next point. Typically, there are a number of questions that arise because the commercialization or taking science to market is so complicated and takes so much time. There are a number of agencies involved in this. First and foremost, for those people that are coming out of universities and institutions, there is obviously the Technology Transfer Office or some description of that, which has a role to play. Their role is to secure the best possible deal for the institution, of course. Their role is to make sure they comply with all the legal requirements, the requirements of the funding agencies that are putting in the money, and to keep everything transparent and ensure that governance is good. University departments, typically what they're looking for is money and talent, right? So if something gets commercialized out of the department, they want a good chunk of the company or of the profits or of the royalties so they can continue doing their research and teaching according to the requirements. So that's totally understandable. Then you have government agencies which are also trying to ensure that society benefits. So they are putting in a lot of money. Actually, we all imagine that the venture capital industry is putting in the money. The reality, as we see, is that without government intervention, we certainly wouldn't have the vaccines that we have today coming through, right? They play a massive role. I can't see any venture capitalist or bank putting in the money to produce the vaccines that we require, that is coming, or the research that went into the production of the vaccines also has required government agencies. Now we have to think to ourselves, if government is putting so much money into research, putting so much money into the development of solutions, why do we then think that we should try to avoid paying taxes on that? Or why is it that the super returns that are required by the investor community is legitimate, but trying to pay the money back to the transfer offices or to the universities is somehow greedy on their part? So you can already see that there are all sorts of cultural tensions which can arise in just that small stakeholder group of 4 agencies. And then, of course, one has to deal with the supply chain, and what we want is some free stuff to begin with from them, and then later on, as we scale things up. Then you have other people involved in this. Customers are involved, of course. If they don't buy, there's nothing there, but we need we need to understand even who they are to begin with. The technical team, it's all well and good having a scientific discovery, but from a scientific discovery to make it into a product requires an enormous amount of extra effort, of systems thinking, requires engineering, multidisciplinary teams, all kinds of things need to come into that. And then the founders, what is their motivation and who are the founders? Are there some random people? Very often you find that the founding team either is made up of 2 very good friends or 2 former colleagues, or somehow some strangers come together who do or do not consider themselves as founders. And this has actually got a psychological impact on the behavior of the team who do or do not feel ownership of the product, the technology, and the idea. Then, of course, we hire staff. And then, we have an impact on our family as well. And we need their trust. We need their forgiveness for the work that we do and the pace at which we want to progress further forward. So all kinds of issues that arise and all kinds of questions that come up from all these various phases. Let me just take stock. Please please, if any questions arise, please just interrupt me straight away. And I'm hoping that we will have questions because this is such a big topic.
Not yet, no.
Not yet. Come on, Riga. Let's have some questions. Let's have a conversation. So, and then I'd like to just highlight your journey that you're going to face. I'm assuming that as a result of Deep Atelier, that many of you will be inspired to think that you have a brilliant idea, a brilliant product, a team that can go forward, and that you're energized to take something. And why am I interested in this topic myself? Frankly speaking, if we don't make an impact or have a purpose or meaning in our life, like what's the point, right? Yeah, we can of course put bread on the table and live a comfortable life, but the amount of talent which is coming to Deep Tech Atelier and agencies of this kind are people who are brilliant with their science, with their entrepreneurial capabilities. And with that, we should be able to make a difference, move the needle, if you like, of societal impact as we go forward. That's my passion for it. That's why I think entrepreneurship is so important, is that we can bring big solutions with little resources because of the inner energy that people bring to the table. Let's just take, for instance, the issue of climate change or the food security issues, of refugee crises, of water shortages around the world, or agriculture and food requirements. All of these things come together, health, biotech, all of them require solutions from one kind or another. And that's why we all have to learn about this journey that we have to make. We have to do it together. It's kind of mixing oil and water all the time, right from the start. What does that look like for us? Look, before anything starts, the scientist comes along and think, okay, I have this brilliant idea. And then somewhere, maybe in a restaurant or in a conversation in a coffee club or something like that, they start talking to their colleagues and somebody says, yeah, why don't you commercialize this thing? Why don't you take it to market? It makes a difference. Why do you just want to write academic papers around this thing, right? And then interestingly, I mean, one example is Professor Henning Sieringhaus, who was a young professor. No, he was not yet a professor. In the hierarchy, he was a lecturer. He was thinking about his work in organic light-emitting polymers. And so, this is fascinating. We can publish papers. And his mentor, Professor Richard Friend, had more than 4,000 citations over one particular paper. When I last looked at it, it's probably about 40,000 now, about how OLEDs work. And Henning had to make a decision about whether he would leave academia to start a company around this whole area of OLEDs, or whether he would stay in university and keep publishing research papers. And then one of my students asked him a question, a big open lecture, says, how did you decide what to do? He said, well, I thought about it over a weekend. I decided I can do both. I can both be a professor and publish, but by having an engagement with an entrepreneur, that my product, my solutions, my technology can also go to market. So it so happened that a former PhD in physics is Hermann Hauser. Hermann Hauser took the entrepreneurial route, is a big-time investor. Companies like ARM and various others have come out of his work. And he was also therefore available to Richard Friend and Henning Sieringhaus. And they together formed this area of OLEDs and so on in the Cambridge environment, which, by the way, subsequently got licensed out to Samsung. And this beautiful curved screen, the OLED screens and so on, came from the original work in the physics department, not only at Cambridge, but other places too. My knowledge is about the Cambridge thing. So Henning, as a young professor, decided he could try to do both. So this is a decision for those of you that are scientists in the room who need to figure out which is what your journey wants to be. And how deep is the knowledge that you bring to the table? Then you start the journey and you have to establish your credentials. What is the quality of your academic papers and publications? The IP ownership question comes up. Are you actually free to commercialize? What's the stack? Which part of that IP is yours? Which part belongs to other people? How do you combine them into something that looks like a product or looks like a service that can go to market? Your own IP, for example, just trivializing it a bit, might just be a valve, right? The valve might be of some new biomaterial or something like that. Really important. But unless you understand how it goes into the fittings, how it fits with the pipelines, what fluids are going through, who needs it, what pressures are involved, what temperatures are involved, your IP by itself is useless. Therefore, at the start of the journey, my strong recommendation is don't file for patents right at the beginning. Work in a kind of stealth mode a little bit, right? You never need to reveal your IP when you're starting out. You only reveal that you have a solution to a problem. So identify what the problem is, just talk about that. Well, during the start of the process, of course, you have to firm up all the legal aspects. You have to do your due diligence, as it's called by the investor community. That's when you write down your patents and so on and so forth. Everything is made solid. Now, it looks like it's very incremental. The journey from left to right on my screen there could take 2 years, 3 years, maybe even 5 years. It's not trivial. And you might go back and forth along this. Life isn't a straight line. Then after the start, you have to continue to provide your scientific credibility. And now you have a team of good quality scientists and engineers who are coming together. And the science discovery and making it are two completely different things. So, the people who are going to make it need to understand supply chains and where to find components. Your need is to say deep inside, does it all work? And then in the growth phase, if not earlier, the scientist needs to learn to let go. Because unless you let go, you can't grow. Meanwhile, they have the techie guys coming in, the techie folk, I should say now. Their question is not, what's the science here? Can we make this thing? So your design thinking kicks in here. What is your product and your service? You define it. What's the customer going to pay for? Those of you that are into computers will remember the Raspberry Pi, which in the early days just came in a bubble wrap. Now it comes in a beautiful box, which means the technology readiness level is much further forward for the bigger markets. And then you have to provide somebody who can lead the scaling up of the making and buying and producing. Meanwhile, the entrepreneur is coming in and asking the question, does anybody need this? Are they going to pay for it? Where are the markets and the customers? How do we validate there's a requirement for all of this? And they have a huge amount of paperwork to do at the startup. Shareholder agreements, directors' duties and MOUs and legal contracts and HR contracts and IP registration, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a thankless task for the entrepreneur at that point. And then they're expected also magically to wear the Superman or Wonder Woman costume and provide clear strategy and direction to the funding, the team building, and so forth. So yes, a huge amount that needs to be done in mixing oil with water. Again, let me take a quick break. Any questions yet?
Yes. It took some time actually for people to start asking questions. And for example, this one is pretty straightforward. Is it necessary to have more than one founder in any startup?
Yes. So this is a great question actually, because it is very hard for founders to think, who do I trust that I bring in? That we stay together for long enough that we form into a good quality team, as opposed to I get these people, I can't get on with them, the chemistry doesn't work. And a couple of my slides going forward will hopefully answer that question. But yes, please think of entrepreneurship, think of founding as a team activity, not a solo activity.
And there's another one. Who should be end responsible for success in the team?
The team should take a collective responsibility but in the end, I think the CEO, the buck stops the CEO. But in that question also, it's brilliant. Try to find a mentor who can be a chair for the company. Somebody with a bit of wisdom and capacity. So when the oil and water is to be mixed, and if there is some turbulence, you have some external wisdom that can come in and calm things down, kind of like a referee almost, or a father figure or a mother figure who can calm things down. So, but the CEO has to take the final responsibility, for sure.
There's another one. What if someone is not 100% expert in business or science, but very good at idea generation? Can he or she still be a good founder?
Yes, as a founder, yes. But to grow the business, you need to be able to nail down the detail. And the ideas person is also a good extra voice in the team, but they have to moderate themselves. As one of my former colleagues, Professor Tony Watson, was saying, there is a fatal distinction between the creative, the entrepreneurial mind, and the managerial mind. Which is the entrepreneurial creative, if they only stand around waving their arms and doing all this kind of stuff, nothing gets done. At the same time, if the manager never embraces creativity, also they never get any innovation. So there's a duty here for this creative person who's asked the question to say, hang on, we need periods of creativity which generate the idea, then we need periods when we get things done.
Thank you. Is it a good idea to transfer intellectual property to the scientist team before commercialization?
Okay, so this is about vesting the IP. So vesting the IP, let's assume it's from the university just for a moment. The IP should go to the company, not to the individual. So the person whose name is on the patent, for example, the IP, I'm assuming it's a patent in this context, that is the author of the patent. The owner of the patent would be the institution that paid for it in the first place, all the research and filing of the patent. If the scientist happened to do that personally, then the scientist owns the patent. But then the ownership can be transferred, or the expression is vested to the company in exchange for a percentage of the company or some other commercial arrangement.
Yes, thank you. And then I guess this would be the last in this particular question session.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
Yeah. So let me read it. When multiple scientists, meaning a team or even multiple institutions, are working on invention or technology, who should be the one involved in commercialization?
Okay, so this is a great question. So I think it will come down to one individual who has the energy to try and pull the coalition of interests together into a common and shared understanding, because the motivations are different for different agencies, whether it's multiple universities, multiple research organizations, governments, and so on, all have their own rules. And somebody who believes passionately about something is probably the individual who has to try and draw these things together and get everybody onto, as it were, the same page of agreement. That's where it is. It's going to be very, very complicated. And sometimes you might have to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Right? Return on time invested. If the idea is big enough, of course, go. But if it's not, let it go. Go have a nice coffee and think of something more simple.
Okay, thank you so much. One more, Professor.
Sure.
And this is
Nice.
this can be answered quite quickly, I guess. How to find the first buyer of the product or innovation we produce? Yeah.
Come on the master classes, and I'll tell you. Which is a big question. Yeah. So you have to first of all, I think, get into the helicopter. Okay, metaphorically speaking. And look at the landscape of all the suppliers and the customers and the members of the supply chain that go from the very early stages of production all the way through to the end. Get a mapping out, a strategic map, if you will, and then see where it is exactly that you fit, and see who the companies are that are in that part of the map, and then go talk to them. And then somewhere along the line, you will get an answer. I'm sorry, it's a 1-minute answer, but that's what it is. If you decide to come on the master classes or do something follow up with the commercialization reactor, I'm sure you will find lots of help to answer that question properly and in detail.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. We can proceed now.
Thank you so much. Okay, so here are typically the questions and the worries that arise. We've already covered the first one on the left-hand side. Who owns the IP? Okay. Well, question here is, fine, who owns it is one thing. Who's going to make money from it? What's the commercial arrangement to take the IP to make a difference? Now, some universities see it as their duty to make sure that society benefits from the knowledge which exists. Right? In other places, the IP is another word is intellectual police. They kind of put you into prison, and they, it's kind of like this is so precious. Those of you that have seen Lord of the Rings will remember Gollum talking about precious, the precious ring, and it belongs to them. No, 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 no. Let's try and make a difference. Yes, we should make money from it. Yes, it's our idea, but isn't it more important that society benefits from this? So what is this IP thing about anyway? That's other questions that come up. How much of the company do I get in exchange for it? I've had a very frustrating time with one particular scientist who simply is unable to let go and is wanting to hold on to nearly 100% of the company. And the company has gone nowhere for 5 years now. The same idea has moved and is being done by somebody else. And that is moving at an accelerated pace because of the distribution of fairness across. The thing that we're dealing with in academic cultures and sometimes in civil service, and I have to say that I come across this in many, many countries, is sometimes that ownership of the company or wanting a decent salary is seen as greed. I think we should see it as fair reward, just reward for what is being done. So that is a team issue. And the language of startups is too complicated for scientists. What is all this shareholder agreement and IP investing and all this jargon that we have picked up? Of course, it's tough for them, but equally for the entrepreneur, it's difficult to understand what they're talking about. And then in some institutions, actually, for the academics, because of HR policies, and there's not necessarily in Latvia, but other countries that I've seen, entrepreneurship is almost a criminalized effect. You're almost seen like doing something really bad, So there are cultural barriers as well. And then oftentimes I find academics say, I just need money to do my research. And because research money is not coming in, if I start a company, I can use the profits for my research. Fair enough, that's a motivation. Meanwhile, the entrepreneurs are saying, what is the scientist even talking about? Okay? Is there a product here? Who are the customers for this? And can I grow this enough? It seems rather risky. Why am I putting my life into this idea and this relationship? Where can I get? So you can see there's 101 questions that are arising from these different conversations between the oil and the water mixing activities going on. By the way, I'm still open to questions. So if there are any questions, please pop them to your moderator who's doing a fabulous job of collecting them.
Not at the moment. Not at the moment.
It'll come. It'll come. So now I'm coming to the topic of team chemistry, because I want to encourage as many of you as possible to take this entrepreneurial journey. I would like you to do that with the kind of concept of affordable loss. Don't put your family at risk. Don't put your careers and your reputations at risk, but figure out your boundary zones of how much you can go and where you can go with this thing, and then take the leap forward and make a difference on this planet. So what are the issues then of the team chemistry, right? So this piece of work, this 5-star model here, came out of academic piece of work some years ago on the formation and development of entrepreneurial teams. If anybody wants a copy, please connect through to me, and I'm more than happy. It's a bit of an academic paper, but nonetheless interesting. It came from a PhD student of mine who was looking at the teams in a business that has now had hard times, called Nokia, but at the time they were growing at a tremendous pace. And what we learned from that and my subsequent 15, 20 years of working with entrepreneurial teams is the following. The 5 major points on this chart can either make or break your team. The first thing is the ability of the leadership team to create a strong and powerful vision that says, this is the big why. Why are we doing this? And for all of you that are there, yes, we have to deal with the minutiae of detail around IP and funding and customers and markets. But if we don't have the big why, the vision, what's the point, right? We don't get it. We don't get it. We can't provide a rationale for why we're hiring certain types of people, why we're going to talk to certain types of customers, what our supply chain needs to be. All of that is dependent and predicated on our being able to create a simple, straightforward vision of where we want to go, or what problem we're trying to solve. Then at the same time, that same leadership team needs to be able to convert that vision into a set of tasks. As a result of this, we need to do the following: A, B, C, D, E, right? And that simplifies the whole proposition. To not, we'll call it to simplify, but not to oversimplify, that it just seems like trivial, right? It's kind of ability to understand the vision and the connection to the tasks that need to be done. So that's step one. For me, that's like the 12 o'clock thing. That's the biggest agenda of them all. The second piece, which is important, is what we could describe as social skills. By social skills, what I mean is that the team is respectful of each other, are able to get on with each other, that they have a sense of humor, that they can talk comfortably, easily, and they can challenge each other in a respectful way. There's good timekeeping, there's good presentation skills, there's good team building skills. There's all of that sort of basic human behavioral stuff that comes together under this broad heading of social skills. Interestingly, I don't think we get taught that in our university education. I think we learn that from who we are and the environment we live in. And you can find that there's a huge difference in the way that people approach this thing. But one example is a simple soundbite would be praise in public, criticize in private. Now, with the growth of emails and the growth of WhatsApp and the growth of social media, we find increasingly people are criticizing in public and rarely praising in public. And that is creating like a toxic environment around all of us, right? So there's poor social skills, I would say. The other component is that each team member has a depth of expertise. So if I'm a marketing person, I have good marketing. Right? If I'm a tech person, a chemical engineer, I'm a good chemical engineer. If I'm an accountant, I'm a good accountant. So the depth of experience that I bring, is it 5, 10, 15 years, or completely new? Breadth of experience, that I've worked in different industries. Perhaps I've worked in aerospace, I've worked in entertainment, I've worked in sport. I can bring ideas from elsewhere. So each team member has got maybe some different experiences to bring. And that is the antidote to saying we have 2 engineers and a business plan, right, for our company. And if both engineers are both mechanical engineers and their product requires process engineering, they don't know what on earth is going on. So the breadth requires that they've understood, say, the oil and gas sector, the aerospace sector, maybe the defense or whatever it is, automotive, retail, et cetera, et cetera. So the breadth and the depth. So breadth of experience, depth of expertise. Maybe the experience also includes having played in a team sport before, having built a team before. So, life. And then finally, of course, trust. We do what we say. If we don't do that, of course, trust breaks down straight away and we have a problem. I have seen in my personal life that teams have either built beautifully because they start off with a strong vision and good social skills, and they compromise a little bit on experience and expertise and build that into the team profile as things go along. But all the while, the vision, the social skills, and the trust are building up the momentum of the team towards a success. Any one of those points at the start that breaks down, it doesn't matter who owns the IP anymore, because it's not going to go anywhere. So that's a really significant part of it. And part of that journey is described by this fried egg shaped thing, the inner and the outer team. Because also as the company grows and goes away from the research laboratory, goes towards the marketplace, different people are coming in, right? Some of you may have heard, in the social Silicon Valley thing, I was employee number 35, I was employee number 65, et cetera, et cetera. These kinds of topics come up. They feel like they are part of the founding culture, the DNA, if you will, of the business, right? But are you open to the best interest of the business? Are you there because you are part of the founders, or because you're there because you bring expertise? And a beautiful example actually from a construction company where the 2 founders, both builders, hired a finance director, but they never treated him like a finance director. So they would meet from 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock. The finance director would come in at 8 o'clock and they would give him a piece of paper and said, yeah, we need these things done now. So they were treating him in a clerical way. I happened to find this out through conversations with both sides. And I said, guys, you're hiring this person, you're paying him a huge director's salary. He doesn't know you meet from 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock. So he comes in, he thinks he's coming in early at 8 o'clock. Why don't you invite him to your meeting between 7 and 8? And they did. And he was such a talented guy. The company grew at more than 30% per year for several years after that, because now the inner core team had built trust with an external agency that had so much more skill than they did that they flourished. So it depends how you bring people into the team, not just hire them into the company. And sometimes they leave, and sometimes the departure can be painful. Sometimes it can be managed nicely. But whatever it is, you are ultimately creating the cultural DNA of your business. How you want your business to grow. What sort of atmosphere do you want in there? So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm conscious I've got a few more slides, but I'm also more than happy to take any more questions at this point regarding the team.
I think we can also overrun the time, no problem. We have approximately 15 minutes left. But there's a couple of questions coming in. For example, this one. Invention and innovation, is it the same, or where's the difference between invention and innovation?
Very nice. So an invention would be something that has arisen out of maybe deep research. So the light bulb might be an invention, but providing the lighting that comes from the light bulb might be the innovation, i.e. the journey that follows. So yes, it's a very interesting thing. You can't have a series of invention would be almost like a noun, I suppose, in this context, and innovation might be the active verb or adjective that describes what happens with the invention.
And then there's another one. I hope I understand the question correctly. Should an entrepreneur do a kind of due diligence to be sure that the innovation or technology is really valid?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. And what you would do, the practical side of that, is you would go ask Professor Google in the first instance, put the invention or innovation into the search engine and see what comes up. Then look for something called Google Scholar, or go to an academic public library and look for academic publications in that area. And you would look for two things. One is the inventor seen as one of the rock stars in the field, if that's what you're looking for? And which other laboratories in the world are working on a similar concept? And then you would also look to do a patent search using the services of the European Patent Office, EPO. And again, by using a string of words, you would search to see what other patents are in that same area that you are searching for. All of that can be done quite easily by you, free of charge. And you would do that as the first basis of your work. Absolutely.
Would you trust a source like Wikipedia in that sense?
A little bit. It's a source. Everything has to be questioned, not only Wikipedia. Even sometimes academic journals have been known to get things completely wrong. So you have to just validate everything. You have to be really like an investigative journalist on this and be curious, thoroughly curious. And then also to try to find 3 or 4 of the big names in the field and try to have a phone call with them.
I was asking this because I happened to work a while in a clinic, and my responsibilities included introducing of new medical technologies in the portfolio. And sometimes the guys who approached us brought things that are really, really fishy and tricky, and you don't even understand what they mean. And you can't find any publications on PubMed or serious scientific sources. But at the same time, there are good testimonials by other clinics and so, and then you get completely confused. And Wikipedia might help in some cases, I think. If it says,
it's a great point.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
if it says it's quackery, then it's most probably a quackery.
Yes, I think that's a good source, like any other source, but you have to cross-check and check again. And I don't think one should rely on any single source as the ultimate voice, but just to check that voice with maybe at least a couple of other sources to say,
Definitely.
look,
I totally agree with that. So, how in depth an entrepreneur should understand the technology?
okay, so the entrepreneur's role, once they're satisfied that the technology that's coming their way is robust, then their attention should be to how do we use this in the hands of the customers? What is the value proposition to the customer? Right? Why does it matter to them? So that should be the focus of the conversation for the entrepreneur. Is the synthesis between the discovery or invention, the innovation, call it what you will at this point, and with the needs of the customer. Who needs this? That should be their question all the time. Who needs it and will they pay for it? And ultimately.
And then there's another one for this time. It's quite a long one. If your startup does not work in one particular country where the public or the customer is not ready yet to use advanced digital idea, then should you keep on pushing with same people or prepare to launch the product in another country which is maybe ready and well educated to use the product?
Yeah, it's a great point actually, because the adoption of technology, even for example, what we are working on, right? You're working on, I don't know the name of the platform you're using, but whatever it is, it's sophisticated. And it's not available everywhere because of issues of internet and bandwidth access, right? So in a way, it's a reasonable point to make, to ask this question, but I'm not sure if the person asking the question shouldn't go back a step and do the homework first to really understand the landscape of the different geographies, the different industry sectors, different regulatory areas, and so forth. What we talk about is market spaces. I mean, this is coming up 3 times now, so I can't resist saying this is covered in my book. But the point that's being made is really valid. But please don't start doing this thing called pivots. Pivots are really painful, especially in medtech. Very, very painful. And you could be pivoting to the line. You could look like a merry-go-round at a circus. If you're trying to do that strategy, go back a step and say, are we actually solving a legitimate problem?
No more questions at the moment, Professor. You said you've got some more slides. We have 10 minutes, I think, or even more.
Okay, well, I will try and cover this. So I like a good conversation. I'm enjoying this very much as well. So let's move it on to cover off this point about teams as well. So to build a good quality team and to bring the vision to life, the question is, how do you do it? Is that your role, whether you're the scientist or the entrepreneur or whatever it is you're within the team, in small companies, there is nowhere to hide. So you have to figure out how to build and manage relationships. So that, for me, is at the heart of this, the engine, if you will. And therefore, if you look at if you want to start a business, we just talked about all the technical stuff, right? That you have IP and it's robust, and how do you check it, and so on. The other 2 things that the entrepreneurial team needs to figure out is to make sure they understand how the customers, the markets work, the distribution channels, all of the marketing stuff that goes on behind that, and then how the numbers will add up. Let's keep it simple for this time limited. 2 other aspects to make all this happen and come together properly. Social skills we already talked about. We call it personal skills here as well. But the more important bubble here, which looks rather small, is self-awareness. Do I know why I am doing this? Do I have an understanding of my motivations, my circumstances, and the value that I bring to the team? Not in a sort of commercial way, but am I making sense? And also, is my behavior, am I self-aware of my behavior, what it does to the rest of the team? right? So then you take that approach and you say, how does this thing spin in a way that team members come and go and ultimately are able to achieve their vision, right? So you're forming the team, you're forming the business, you're planning it, you're doing it, you're improving it. And all the time, these 6 bubbles are spinning around and changing dynamically, and understanding that dynamic spinning and able to manage all that really is looking for some almost like a superhuman effort, which is why you need to get somebody to be a good mentor or chair for your company who can bring this together, because your journey can look and feel really, really strange, right? As you go from science towards business, going from something very elemental all the way through to the end. So I'm nearly there. Just a couple of points, and then any more questions, I'm more than happy to take. This is interesting. Yeah, here we go. So how do you go forward, folks? How do you bring this oil and water together to make magic? Well, I think you have a number of personal goals, the understanding of why am I doing this? Am I doing this for the money? Am I doing this because I have nothing better to do? Am I doing this because I'm passionate about it? I want to solve a really big problem. And then, of course, the business has to make money. It has to be sustainable. It has to meet regulatory standards requirements. It has to do all of that profit and loss stuff, and customer requirements, etc. So those things need to align. Those things need to align to finally meet the vision and the values that you have in the company, the understanding of the big why. It's a rather simple diagram, but behind this is a lot of effort that's required in bringing this together. So I would say that for the scientists in the audience who are thinking, what are we trying to do here? I just want my product or my invention to go to market. And why is it that the entrepreneurial team wants 50, 60% of the company, and I get 40, I've invented this thing, and so on and so forth. This is illustrating to you how complicated the journey is. And yes, if you want to be the entrepreneur as well as the scientist, and you are taking on all the heavy lifting that's required, then surely you should have a good chunk of the company. If, on the other hand, you're kind of outsourcing the commercialization and all the risks that go with it to the entrepreneurial team, then you need to be able to share your company, your invention in a more generous way with that lot. And in the end, you have to find a way of putting things back together again. So it is an image I'd like to leave in your mind is about how do you get this alignment of personal business goals towards the vision, the values, the big why that makes it a big success for you. Because if we can achieve that, when oil and water can be put together, it can be really, really beautiful. And I hope very much that my talk, which has spanned quite a number of different areas, is helping you to move things forward. I think I'd like to stop my presentation at this point and take any questions that are there.
Thank you so much, Professor. I would say this was something like what we call in Latvian obligātā literatūra, which means the compulsory reading at the school, where there are certain things you just need to move on. You need to know these things to be successful. And I really hope that there was a lot of viewers and listeners online who had the opportunity to listen to Professor Shai Vyakarnam. Let me check now. I'll refresh the page to see if there are any questions. Yes, there are. So,
great. Excellent.
Consensus or power of the majority? What do you think in the light startups? What do you think in the light? Startups should move fast.
Yes.
Yes. Do I get the question now? Consensus or power of the majority?
I think so. Decisions have to be split up into different categories. Okay, there's a material difference that is made to, let's say, the very early stages. There are some decisions which are make or break to the company, and the way the decision should be made is somebody should maybe make a proposal of doing X, Y, or Z. It comes to the group of people that are involved, and they have hopefully an intelligent conversation and they come to a decision which is the right one. Because decision-making, risk-taking are quite complicated areas in themselves. But in the end, when the decision is made, it is implemented. If there is a tie, if you like, then we have to defer to the CEO, who gets some advice from outside and checks things out. If the CEO makes repeatedly mistakes, then of course their career could be short-lived in the company. But we're not running a democratic parliament, we're running a business.
Okay, thank you. Market is changing. I believe that working on niche products is the success factor. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly to start with, it's exactly right, because then you have a deep understanding of the customer's needs. It has to be commercially viable, otherwise, of course, it doesn't work. But niche is a fabulous way to start before we try to go to mass market. Absolutely agree with that.
So another one. What, according to you, is the age limit to start a business if you have already spent 2 decades as an employee in some company?
Oh, please start. Completely by chance, I'm working on a project with a dear friend of mine in Malaysia, and we call it Midlife Enterprisers. And it's basically for people exactly like this individual who's asked the question, who's been working in industry. This is backed up by an article recently in Harvard Business Review that most successful companies are started on average by people who are about 45. And I think now that life expectancy is growing in most countries, I would say if you've been involved in industry for the last 20 years and you want to make a jump, make a change in your direction, and you have the resources or the savings that enable you to have maybe, say, a year, maybe a little bit more time on your hands to get the startup going, why not? What's to stop you?
Just what popped up in my mind, there's a company in Latvia named Game Changer Audio. And as far as I know, they started as a rock band when the boys were at the age of like 14, 15, most of them. And they decided to build a guitar pedal, a sound effect pedal.
Yes.
And my son happened to be the bass player in that band. And I remember when they told me that we are constructing a new guitar pedal, I said, okay, guys, you are most probably reinventing the bicycle. And it's, well, there will be no success. I can tell you absolutely sure. And you know what? I'm absolutely sure they did not watch your lectures and they didn't have the opportunity to read your books, but somehow they managed to do it everything according to what I heard during the last 40 minutes now. So they started as musicians, then they added, of course, electronic engineers, then they added a bookkeeper, they added marketing people and so on. And today they have the turnaround of several million euros already. And the effect machines they are producing are used by the biggest rock stars, including, I think, Rolling Stones and David Bowie's ex-band. So they've made a real success.
Well, they've applied a lot of intelligence and common sense to that.
Exactly.
And you know, very interesting story.
So, one more question.
Sure.
If an employee in a company holds a good position, but he believes that would be nice to start his own startup, and he goes for it and he fails and it doesn't work that good. So what would be your advice? Should that person continue with another idea and another product, or to start looking for a job or going back to the previous company?
Okay, so it's a brilliant question, because it's all about that idea of walking on hot coals, right? What do we do? So I would say the following things. First and foremost, use the principle of what we might call affordable loss. Okay, what can you afford to lose? Do you have, let's say, 6 months, 1 year, maybe 2 years of headroom because your family is going to give you some support and backup? So that's the first thing. You should never put your family at risk, I don't think, for this. So make sure that that part of it is covered. And any other of the risks that you imagine there to be, like reputation, cash, house, money, mortgage, loans, etc. So make sure that's clear. Second aspect, check that your personal circumstances will allow you to do it. So are you living with your family? Are you living on your own? Do you have obligations to aging parents? Do you have children in school? What's your situation? What's your circumstance? You're a young person in their 20s with no obligations. Therefore, you're completely free to do what you want to try and do. Thirdly, I would say, whilst you're an employee, take your time on a part-time basis to do what is increasingly described as a side hustle. Now, that sounds a little bit cheap, sounds a little bit like a Chicago or, New York type thing, but it's basically try and start a business idea on the side in the evenings and weekends, primarily to validate that your idea can work. So you will learn so much from doing that. If your employer is open to the idea, maybe you can negotiate 1 day a week with them, where you can go and do your thing on the side, right? So mitigate for the risk as much as you can by validating the market, validating the product, getting the headroom to do things. And then if it looks good, do it. If it fails, as long as you haven't been a crook, you can always get a job somewhere else, or maybe back with your former employer. I don't know your circumstances to give you direct advice, but I would say use affordable loss as a principle, do something, learn something, be hungry for knowledge, and then try it.
Don't put all the eggs in the same basket, right?
Precisely.
So, no more questions at the moment, and time's up too. Unfortunately, it's been such a pleasure to listen to you, Professor. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I look forward to receiving the recording as well, so I can make a note of the questions and things. Thank you so much.
We'll take care of that. Thank you one more time, and see you. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was the last presentation on the stage of medical technologies in the Deep Tech Atelier conference, and this is actually the end of the day on our stage.